No Justin?
No.
No. Sorry.
That guy.
You got rid of him? Got
He's
enough of that. Yes. I'm sorry to hear that. So, oh, wait a minute. I'm almost ready. Okay. So we got the Ahab last time, huh?
We were almost to him.
We were on
Yeah,
verse
he got-
29 of chapter 16 of 1 Kings, I believe.
Yeah, he got killed.
Oh yeah, he got killed in Chronicles. Yeah. So now we're going to back up and we're going to look at his reign over the northern kingdom. So think about this as oh, you want some of them? Think about this as we've seen the ending. Now we get to look at the flashback to everything.
A river movie?
No, just pull the whole thing. I'm assuming is it got stubs? I didn't even look at them. They're not giving away anything, unless you want to go buy a chance to win $250 worth of gas. But I've been selling you raffle tickets. I ain't in that game of chance stuff. So just stick it in that rubber band and I'll get it. Thank you. All right. So we pick up in 1 Kings chapter 16. We very quickly go through Baasha's reign over Israel, Elah's reign over Israel, Zimri's reign over Israel. We went through all those terrible things in the way that it happened. People were getting ambushed and assassinated, and they weren't in power for very long. Even Omri, who wasn't in power for very long, but he was very busy when he was king. And when you look at other historical accounts of the day, they talk a lot about the Omride dynasty and all that he did as a part of that, but it was really very short-lived too. And then we have Ahab. And Ahab and Jezebel are famous in Israelite history for just being awful. And so what a reputation to have, huh? We remember you for all of time because of just how terrible you were. And so we're going to look at that, and what we're going to look at really more than anything tonight is Elijah and his whole role in the kingship of Ahab. So, in verse 29, chapter 16, 1 Kings, says, in the 38th year of Asa's reign over Judah, Omri's son Ahab became king over Israel. Ahab, son of Omri, ruled over Israel for 22 years in Samaria. So a long time. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the sight of the Lord than all who were before him. So up till now, all these other kings were just child's play compared to Ahab. He's going to turn out to be one of the worst. If you had to pick top three, he'd make the top three. As if following in the sinful footsteps of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, was not bad enough, he married Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians. All right, so here he is. He married the daughter of this king, who is king over basically Phoenicia. So Phoenicia, if you go up the Mediterranean coast north of Israel, even present-day Israel, and you swing over into Syria and on up around Lebanon, and you're approaching Turkey in that direction, all of that was considered Phoenicia. So there were two towns that were close to Israel. Those would be, anybody know? Sidonians is from Sidon. And then the town just down the coast from Sidon would be Tyre. So we know those two cities because of Jesus and his woes that he speaks to the people in Capernaum and and in Jerusalem, where he says, "Woe to you! Had these things been said in the cities of Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented and believed." Okay, so Jesus is basically saying to them that in this sinful Baal worshiping country, if they had heard what you heard, then they would be better off. They would have repented and believed. And in one of the synoptics, it says they will be better off at the judgment than you are. So that's how we hear the name Tyre and Sidon. But this was at the time of that we're looking at here, just their God was Baal as strongly as Israel's God was to be Yahweh. It says, then he worshipped and bowed down to Baal. It says it like this in the Hebrew. It says, and he went and served Baal and bowed down to him. So, to make it worse, Ahab leaves his throne and his country, and he goes to this foreign country and worships Baal. And then as he brings back Jezebel, she brings all of that with him, and he has no reason to object because he's already, the expression of selling your soul is, cliche, but that's what he's done. He's kind of crossed that line and can't get back. Doesn't want to get back. So it says he set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal he had built in Samaria. Okay, so Yahweh's temple is in Jerusalem, right to the south of Samaria, just a few miles. So this Samaria had been bought by Ahab or Omri. I forget which one bought it. Bought it from Shamar to make it into the capital. And so here it is. He's built a temple there for Baal. There's no temple there to Yahweh. You recall Jeroboam. What did Jeroboam do? Jeroboam he had 2 golden calves built. And one was set in the north and one was set in the south so that people could easily get to where they wanted to go to worship what he described as the God that led you out of slavery. So from the very beginning, idol worship becomes a part of the northern kingdom's practice, but it just continually to spiral down and get worse and worse and worse. And as we will see in a little bit, as we move through the rest of the book, that eventually child sacrifice becomes a part of all of this. So when you start fooling around with this stuff, it's hard to find a place to stop. When you bring idols that you worship as you would God into your life, meaning that when you start bringing things into your life that you believe without them, your life will fail, it will be non-productive, it will have no meaning. You start bringing those things into your life, and pretty soon they really do have control over your life, which is what happened here. Verse 33. So Ahab also made an Asherah pole. He did more to anger the Lord God, page pause, of Israel than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So not only Baal, remember Asa had destroyed all these things that had crept into the country in the south, and all the Asherah poles that had come up. And here we are, just almost contemporary to Asa. Ahab is building these things wholesale in the northern kingdom. During Ahab's reign, Hiel the Bethite rebuilt Jericho. All right? Remember Jericho? What happened to Jericho? Yeah. Yeah, so God told them, here's this formidable city and well fortified. And when the children of Israel come into the promised land, they don't know what they're going to do. And God says, look, march around the city. How many times?
7.
7 times, yeah. Yep. And then what did they do? Blew horns and broke a clay jar. And the walls just went and fell down. All right. So after they had defeated Jericho, Joshua said, cursed be anyone that would rebuild this city. Okay. So that's in the book of Joshua. Okay. So here's the first guy in history. Hiel, the Bethite, rebuilt Jericho. Abraham, his firstborn son, died when he had laid the foundation. Segub, his youngest son, died when he erected its gates, in keeping with the Lord's message that he had spoken through Joshua, son of Nun. So the writer throws this in to remind us, because through this, when we get to Elijah, we really begin to see that God is active, he's present, and he's in control of things. And this is the writer's subtle way of bringing God back into focus. That this is a historical action that God has been a part of all this time. And it's not going to change. Although it appears as though the wishes of God are being overridden by Ahab and these other gods, we're going to find out quickly that that's not the case. So they introduce it in a small way. Remember, we talked about this and Samuel and the Hebrew writings often do this. They'll introduce a little thing that seems to be a little thing, but it's actually a little microcosm of the big thing that's about to come. Okay, and so that's what this is. It's a little story that tells us, yeah, God's here, and you don't want to fool around with God, and let's keep your eyes open because something big's about to happen. And something big does happen. So, chapter 17. Just out of nowhere, we're introduced to Elijah. Elijah the Tishbite. From Tishba. Isn't that appropriate? In Gilead, said to Ahab. Now, we don't know how he gets an audience with Ahab. There's no pedigree here. There's none of this stuff. He just appears. And so the subtlety about that is that Elijah's God's man. And so our assumption is, and the writer would want you to assume this, that God just puts him there. He's going to use Elijah, and so he's there. And God, I can't even say his name, and he was here last night. Todd. Like Todd was saying last night, you don't have to have a pedigree. You don't have to know what you're doing. But if you're going to be God's man, he's going to put you where he wants you, and you're going to do what he wants you to do. And that's the way we're kind of introduced to Elijah. He just appears out of nowhere in this story, and he's God's man. So he said to Ahab, as certainly as the Lord God of Israel lives, whom I serve, in parentheses, there will be no dew or rain in the years ahead unless I give the command. So Elijah walks in and says, you're serving Baal, I'm serving God. Your Baal has control over the storms and the weather and all of that, but I'm telling you, God said that there's not going to be rain or dew at all until I say there is. So you can be Baal's man, I'll be God's man, and let's see how this works out. All right. The Lord's message came to him, leave here and travel eastward. Hide out in the Kerith Valley near the Jordan. Drink from the stream. I have already told the ravens to bring you food there. So he carried out the Lord's message. He went and lived in the Kerith Valley near the Jordan. The ravens would bring him bread and meat each morning and evening, and he would drink from the stream. So he's over on the kind of the western edge of the the country. He goes all the way over to the eastern edge where the Jordan is, and he does exactly what God says to do. He says, you go over there, the water's going to be good, because by this time the drought and water gets low in the river. It's not too good. Muddy, He says the water's going to be good, and the ravens are going to take care of you. All right. Ravens, when we look at ancient Phoenicia religions, ravens were an omen. Just like they are in Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven. Mm-hmm. We often identify that in English literature, when the raven's present, something bad's going to happen. That comes out of this ancient Phoenician religion, where ravens were taboo. They were an omen of bad things. And so here, what's the point of God using the ravens? Okay? God's in control. If you think the ravens are bad, I'm going to use them for good. Okay? And so it's just another way of illustrating for the reader that God is overcoming every bit of this, even the little things like the ravens. After a while, the stream dried up because there had been no rain in the land. The Lord's message came to him, get up, go to Zarephath in Sidonian territory and live there. I have already told a widow who lives there to provide for you. So he got up and went to Zarephath. All right. Where's the Sidonian territory?
Sidonian.
Yeah, in Sidon. We just talked about it, right? So he said, all right, you've been over here on the Jordan, okay, and you've been enjoying these waters, these Jordan waters. They've provided refreshment, but the river's now dried up. Okay, I got to stop there for a minute. So, what is the significance of the Jordan River up to this point in history? How did the children of Israel get across the Jordan River from the wilderness into the promised land?
They crossed it.
The waters parted, and they walked right through. Yeah.
Did they stack the stones on the other side?
Yep. Stack stones is an altar. Okay. Yep. Ark of the Covenant went before them. The waters opened up, just like it did in the Red Sea. Okay. Well, when we when we begin to look at the significance of these events, we see a baptism going on. We see God bringing his people through troubled water, and on the other side, finding the promise that God had given them. Okay. Well, now, a dried up Jordan means that there's no baptism left for God's people. All that represented is now gone. And so this is a foreshadowing moment for what will happen. What ultimately happens the next time that they cross the Jordan River, they're going into exile. See, it's no longer a baptism. It's a dividing line between the promise and exile. Changes everything until we get to the New Testament. And Jesus, as he does, restores the meaning of everything, even what a river means when it's flowing and when it's dried up. So he says, so he got up and went to Zarephath, to this pagan Baal-worshipping place. When he went through the city gate, there was a widow gathering wood. He called out to her, "Please give me a little water in a cup so I can take a drink." As she went to get it, he called out to her, "Please bring me a piece of bread." She said, "As certainly as the Lord your God lives, I have no food except for a handful of flour in a jar, and a little olive oil in a jug."
Question.
Okay.
Does it make any difference if not says bring me a piece of bread in your hand? Or does it just bring it with you?
Does it? Well, it actually does. And I don't know why mine leaves that out, because you remember the significance of in your hand is pretty significant. The one that, when we look back through 1st and 2nd Samuel, that language is used a lot. That Saul was in David's hand, and yet David gave him mercy and didn't kill him. In fact, there's one passage in there we looked at. It was like 17 times "in your hand" was used. So it is significant here. Because it would mean that she has the power. She has control over the situation. So she said, as certainly as the Lord God lives, I have no food except for a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. Right now I'm gathering a couple of sticks for a fire. Then I'm going home to make one final meal for my son and myself. After we had eaten it, we will die of starvation. So she's on this is her last meal. And Elijah shows up, and he wants something to eat. So he gets his water, and then he asks for the bread, and she's telling him the truth. The other significant part of the passage is that she recognizes him as being a Hebrew, and here he is in the middle of a pagan land. And so she says, as surely as your God lives, this is what is happening. So what is she saying? Your God has no power here. As sure as your God lives, I'm starving. Okay? We often look at this and we'll say she recognized the holy God of Israel, because of Elijah. Well, she said, as surely as your God lives, I'm about to die. All right? So something is about to happen. A change is about to happen for her. And everything that God has put in motion through Elijah to make this an event that is written down and remembered for thousands of years is about to happen. He says, Elijah said to her, don't be afraid. Go and do as you planned. So he says, fear not. So when God shows up, when his man shows up, the first thing that Elijah does is do what? He dissolves her fear. And she doesn't have to fear. Fear not. He says, go ahead and do as you planned, but first make me a small cake and bring it to me. Then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord God of Israel has said. The jar of flour will not be empty, and the jug of oil will not run out until the day the Lord makes it rain on the surface of the ground. So here's this woman, and he is saying, the Lord God that you have no confidence in because you live in this pagan place, you don't know what he's capable of doing. You think that this is your last meal. I'm here to tell you that this is not going to be your last meal.
It's kind of like the manna.
Kind of like the manna. That's right.
I don't know. I'm kind of just thinking about it and wondering if she's just afraid because she's probably extremely weak, about to die, and he's probably, he's been given food by ravens and drinking water. So here's
right, he's
this
feeling good.
healthy man who could, if she had something, he could take it from her easily. So.
But if you're about to die,
Yeah.
and somebody says, okay, you're about to die, you're on your last meal, do it this way, I might be able to save you through this.
Well, I was just wondering if when he says do not fear, I'm wondering if he's saying do not fear dying or don't be afraid of me.
That's a good question. Let's see.
I think it might be more about her situation as a whole. When he says do not fear.
Let me see what I have these wonderful translation notes here that help me not. Because it doesn't say to what her fear is directed. And And if I could have ever learned to read Hebrew well, I might be able to have a Hebrew Bible and figure it out, but I didn't.
It'll probably take me a week. I might try.
All right, so he tells her what the Lord God of Israel has promised, because the overarching picture is there's fixing to be a showdown between Baal and God. God has had enough of these kings that were put in place by men, because God never wanted kings for his people. He wanted to be the king. And they insisted on a king, so he gave them a king. And, it's just been a disaster from one minute to the next. And so now, this other God and their devotion to him is competing with their devotion for him. And so he's not gonna deal with it much longer. She went and did as Elijah told her. And then it goes on. There was always enough food for Elijah, for her and her family. The jar of flour was never empty, and the jug of oil never ran out, in keeping with the Lord's message that he had spoken through Elijah. So the writer and all of us understand Elijah wasn't doing anything to make any of this happen. It's just like the manna. It shows up every morning, and there it is. So you go out and you get what you need, and you make your cake, and you have your oil, and you cook, and you do that, and you wait for the next day, and there it is again. And so it doesn't say how long this goes on. It goes on for a while. So what is God? What would be the purpose of repeating this time and time again for this woman and for Elijah? What would be God's purpose in doing that?
So she would see that he was the real God.
Yeah.
She'd be shocked every morning to keep finding flour and oil.
He's that God every day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you went to go see Baal, you had to take this stuff to Baal.
Right.
So he would be friendly to you. So he would be nice. But here God gives it to you. It's all backwards. So she's learning some things about the way that God really works in the world is not like she's ever known it before. The other thing is you do it the regular way, and there's scarcity. There's not enough. You live with God, and there's always provision, maybe in abundance. There's always enough. So all of this stuff is coming into play into the story because of what we're leading up to. So we need to really pick out all those little nuances so that we don't miss them when we're in the big story with the showdown of the priest and Elijah. So what else would you imagine would come out of the...
She would tell other people, right?
She's what?
She would tell her neighbors.
Well, yeah, possibly. Possibly not. It may not have had enough if she told her other neighbors. Okay, it doesn't say that she's an evangelist about any of this.
Would they have been upset that she was keeping a Hebrew man in her home, and she was just keeping him around because also food to eat while
yeah, while he's around, there's food to eat. Yeah, that would have been strange for her neighbors. It doesn't really say she has neighbors.
And she's a widow, right? So
Yeah.
she's not married. She's
Yeah.
keeping this Hebrew man
Yeah.
in her house.
See, all of that could be scandalous. But none of it is. What does become scandalous is what happens next. For the reader, now we've seen God provide. We've seen him. I mean, he's taken care of Elijah by the River Jordan. Birds have brought him food and fed him. Sent him all the way back over to pagan country. And he's found this woman. And she's providing him with a meal every day. And God's providing everything she needs, okay? And all that she has in the world is what God is providing and her son. That's it. Then it says after this, verse 17, the son of the woman who owned the house got sick. So the boy got sick. His illness was so severe that he could no longer breathe. So the breath of life has left him. Let me see. Let me see if there's a... No, not really. She asked Elijah, "Why, prophet, have you come to me to confront me with my sin and kill my son?" So what is she... What's the conclusion she's come to about this?
Bad things happen.
No.
Well,
You showed up. You're the holy man of God. God has proven that he does things in an entirely different way. And what's happened here is I've got some sin in my life that now you've exposed to God. And because of my sin, my son is dead. That's what she's blaming Elijah for exposing her sin and causing the death of her son. Okay? So she has in her mind, there's this loving God that's been providing for her, but there's this wrathful God that when he discovers sin, he strikes people down in their sin and they're dead, okay? Or someone that they love is dead.
Which is crazy because if you think that's what they thought about all their gods too.
Well, she certainly had an idea of sin. She knew that sin either was a universal thing that they all had to do no matter what God you worshiped, or she knew that sin was a thing that the Hebrew God really took offense to and killed people over.
Yes, but with their gods, like, you had to do something for them to either treat you good or bad.
Yeah, they had to make whatever sacrifice or offering so that it would rain or whatever.
Yeah.
And you can imagine by this point there's a lot of that going on because there's been in a drought now, not even dew on the ground. Okay, but anyway, so he says, "Hand me your son." So this must have been a small child, right? If she's able to hand him to him. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on the bed. Then he called out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, are you also bringing disaster on this widow I am staying with by killing her son?" He stretched out over the boy 3 times and called out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, please let this boy's breath return to him." Okay, so the first question that he asks is, he says, "O Lord my God, are you bringing disaster on the widow I am staying with by killing her son?" So he's asking this question. Do you think he already knows the answer?
Yeah, I think he's just clarifying it to the woman
Okay.
that her question about
That's right.
He's just repeating her question to his God.
There you go. So he's saying this. We're on Isaiah. Not Isaiah. 1 Kings 17, verse 20. So he asked this question, "Oh Lord, are you doing this so that she can hear?" Well, how are we ever going to know the answer? Okay, did you cause this widow's son to die? And so the answer, Elijah could say, "Well, God told me no, he didn't cause it." The boy's still laying there dead. Okay, so what good is that?
that wouldn't work.
That wouldn't work. All right, so God has already provided oil and flour
Right.
to sustain life on a daily basis. Now let's see what he does. So he stretched out over the boy 3 times and called out to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, please let this boy's breath return to him." The Lord answered Elijah's prayer. The boy's breath returned to him, and he lived. Elijah took the boy, brought him down from the upper room to the house, and handed him to his mother. Elijah then said, "See, your son is alive." The woman said to Elijah, "Now I know you are a prophet, and that the Lord's message really does come through you."
Just crazy at the beginning because when Elijah asked for her son, she could have been just like terrified and mad and just like, no, I don't think so. But at the same time, what else did she have to lose?
What does she have to lose? The boy's dead. And so at the end of this whole episode, okay, then you begin to see some of the parallels in the New Testament, right? The whole Jairus' daughter that dies and takes him into not an upper room but to a room, and he takes just a few people in, and he tells her to get up, and she gets up, and everything's right. And the people are, that's the way Mark describes it, they're just amazed. They're just amazed at Jesus, that he's able to do this. And so now this woman's in the same place. The woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a prophet and that the Lord's message really does come through you." All right, so we've been this section in 17 started out with a message to Ahab. Elijah appears out of nowhere. He's a nobody, and he declares this thing to Ahab. It's coming true, and then at the end of this, we are told again, yeah, what you say is the real deal. No plastic banana here. Okay? Every time you have said anything, it's been true. You told Ahab it wasn't going to rain. It hadn't rained. You told me that the flour and oil would never run out. It never ran out. You told me through a series of questions that your God would bring my boy back to life, and he came back to life. So you're the real deal. So all of that episode is for us, the reader. I mean, there's a lot of good teaching lessons in here. I think we've hit on some of them. There's 100 of them. So the reader is now, the stage is set for Elijah to have this great showdown. He can ask God to breathe life into a person, and that person lives. Okay? That's remarkable. Okay? Up until this, has it ever happened that a man's been raised from the grave? That was dead and was brought to life? No. The only time this has happened previous is when God breathed into man and Adam came forth. He doesn't breathe into the boy, but he hovers over him. You want to go back to the Garden of Eden and the creation story? When the Spirit of God hovers over the deep, yeah, he hovers over the waters and they become non-chaotic anymore. There's life to it. And if we move through the entire 6-7 days and into chapter 2, we discover that the water that is allowed to seep forth out of the ground is life-giving water. And all of that's because the Spirit hovered over the waters, and out of the chaos brought life. Here we have this picture of the Spirit of Elijah hovering, laying over the boy, and life comes. Now, for the Hebrew mind, all of this is working all the time. They never miss this stuff. And for us, we would just read right by it and say, oh, that's a cute little trick. He laid on the boy and he come back to life. But there's always more when we know where to look. And I am having the best time learning how to find these stuff. I read a book by Robert Alter, and it just changed everything for me. And so we're going to do a lot of this on Sunday night, by the way. If you come for that, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of this stuff. All right, so 18. We'll go as far as we can go. Sometime later, in the 3rd year of the famine, the Lord's message came to Elijah. So there's been 3 years, no rain. Not a drop, no dew, no nothing. 3 years later. So he's been with this woman, we assume, up to this point. We're just going to see what happens here. It says, "Go and make an appearance before Ahab, so I may send rain on the surface of the ground." So Elijah went to make an appearance before Ahab. So this is where now he's leaving Zarephath, and he's heading back south down the coast road probably, and going to Samaria where Ahab is. So Elijah made his appearance before Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. So Ahab summoned Obadiah, who supervised the palace. Now Obadiah was a very loyal follower of the Lord. This is not the Obadiah that we have the writing by. It's a different Obadiah. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have stopped there. This is kind of a parenthetical statement that's being made here, the last part of 3 and 4. It says, "Now Obadiah was a very loyal follower of the Lord. When Jezebel was killing the Lord's prophets, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them in 2 caves, in 2 groups of 50. He also brought them food and water." So this is kind of a behind the scenes. He's letting us in on what's been going on these last 3 years or so. Jezebel has been putting Yahweh's prophets to death. Okay. Now the question is, why are they still in the northern kingdom when they could go to the southern kingdom and serve there in the temple? And we're not really given an answer to that, other than there has been great effort by every king in the north to stop that sort of migration. So Jeroboam did it, Omri did it. There was a few others in between there that were their tenure was so short it probably didn't matter much. So that's probably why they're still there, is because they've just been stopped in going. And here we have Obadiah, and he's taking care of them. So Ahab told Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grazing areas so we can keep the horses and mules alive and not have to kill some of the animals." They divided up the land between them to search it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went the other way by himself. As Obadiah was traveling along, okay, so the thing about water, okay, if you go back to creation, there's the calming of the waters, and then God places the land over the waters. You know how it talks about having pillars under the earth that support the earth. Okay, so you got to remember, this is their cosmology. Everything's flat, and so the land becomes quite important in this control that God has over the chaos, and out of the land comes us. So that's part of the image that we bear is this way in which God gives us the ability to triumph over chaos. Well, now, and then as we look in creation story, springs bubble up. They provide life. In the 2nd chapter of Genesis, there's the river of life, and from that river there flows the 4 major rivers in the area: the Tigris, Euphrates, the Pishon, and the Gushan, and so everything that's good, that's flowing through the land, the water that's flowing through the land, Genesis reminds us, comes from the river of life. So it's all life-giving. And so here God has hidden life. He's hidden the source of life. He's trapped it in the sky. He's not allowing it to appear on the land anywhere. Okay? And so this is where the showdown between Elijah and the priest of Baal becomes so significant. Because we'll see, how does God defeat Baal? Water. Lots of water. See? Fire comes and the water. All right. So Obadiah was traveling along. Elijah said to him, when he recognized him, he fell face down on the ground and said, "Is it really you, my master Elijah?" So Elijah is recognized here as somebody that we haven't been privy to. He's known by the prophets, and he's respected by the prophets. He replied, yes. And go say to your master, Elijah is back. I'm back. Obadiah said, what sin have I committed that you are ready to hand your servant over to Ahab for execution? So what is he saying? Man, if I go back and tell Ahab you're here, he's going to kill me for bringing the message. As certainly as the Lord your God lives, my master has sent to every nation and kingdom in an effort to find you. And there he was, right in Jezebel's backyard. When they say he's not here, he makes them swear an oath that they could not find you. Now you say, go and say to your master, Elijah is back? What are you talking about? Okay. But when I leave you, the Lord's Spirit will carry you away, so I can't find you. If I go tell Ahab I've seen you, he won't be able to find you, and he will kill me. That would not be fair, because your servant has been a loyal follower of the Lord from my youth. So you know what he's saying? I'm going to go back and tell Ahab that you're here, and the Spirit of God's going to carry you off somewhere else. So he's finding no good way here. Poor Obadiah feels like he's being trapped between death and doing what his mentor has told him to do. He says, certainly my master is aware of what I did when Jezebel was killing the Lord's prophets. I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves in groups of 50, and I brought them food and water. Now you say, go and say to your master, Elijah is back, but he will kill me. How many times have he said this? 3 times already. But Elijah said, as certainly as the Lord of heaven's armies lives, whom I serve, I will make an appearance before him today. So, what's the literary point of this? Why is he having? Why is so much good scroll material being used up on this scene here of Obadiah and Elijah, where he keeps saying, "Man, I can't go back and tell he's going to kill me. I know if I tell him he's here, he's going to kill me. Okay, he's going to kill me if I go." All right. So where's the contrast?
With Peter in the New Testament, maybe?
Well, there's some. There might be some foreshadowing there. But Elijah's already brought life to a little boy, a little Sidonian boy, Zarephathian boy. Okay, simply because God said. God put the breath back in him, and so now here is Elijah with a servant of the Lord who also is under the servitude of Elijah, and he's scared to death that he's going to die for bringing him this message. But Elijah's already proven you're not going to die.
Do you think the widow knew that they were hunting for him?
Evidently not. What do you think she would have done? There's a good little fictional story.
She got provided life, so you'd be
Yeah.
afraid if your provider left, your life is done.
And gave life to her dead son. So there's the contrast for us in this is, okay, God did this thing to Elijah through this boy that was significant, but it didn't have a national scope. It was just a good thing that God did out of his great abundance and love. Okay, now what Elijah is about to do when he has his showdown is God's showing his power, not just over life, but also over death. It's not going to be Obadiah that dies. Who's going to die? Okay? If Ahab doesn't have the power because Elijah says he doesn't have the power, as surely as I'm speaking to you, I'm going to appear before him today. There's no reason for him to kill you. But there is going to be a reckoning today. Okay? So he's back and he's calling out Ahab is basically what he's doing. All right? So, man, what a powerful thing for us. That the God that has that power provides us with that power. We call out our enemies and we say, we're back, and God's going to do X, Y, or Z. Well, the only way we know that God's going to do that is if we've been close to God. We can't call out anybody if we're not close to Him. We'd have to go hide. He'd have to go hide some more. He'd have to wait and see some more. And we see later that Elijah does have problems with holding on to the strength that he finds in his dependence and reliance upon God. But just as God doesn't leave the little boy dead without a breath, He doesn't leave Elijah in that state of spiritual decay either. He brings him out of that, and He does it rather sternly. Get up. You don't need to be laying around out here in the desert feeling sorry for yourself. You know, and we often get that way too. And so there's this building that's coming, and Obadiah needs to have the same confidence in Elijah as now does the widow who has her son back. The evidence for her was in the life of her son. The evidence for Obadiah and others is going to be the way in which Elijah deals with the prophets of Baal. So in verse 16, when Obadiah went and informed Ahab the king, when he went to inform Ahab, the king went to meet Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, he said to him, man, is it really you, the one who brings disaster on Israel? Okay, so he knows that for 3 years, the very thing that Elijah said was going to happen is happening. So Elijah replied, I have not brought disaster on Israel, but you and your father's dynasty have, okay, Omri and all those before, by abandoning the Lord's commandments and following the Baals. So remember, we talked about seeking the Lord and following His commands. That was during Asa's reign in the southern kingdom. If you seek me, I will be found by you. But if you reject me, I will reject you. I mean, that's the lesson. And so Elijah's laying it out here for Ahab in the north. It says, you have abandoned the Lord's commandments and following the Baals. Now send out messengers and assemble all Israel before me at Mount Carmel, as well as the 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, whom Jezebel supports. So he's calling out both of these gods.
Calling out everybody.
Meet you at Mount Carmel. Y'all all make sure everybody's here to watch. He says, and bring out all these prophets and all these priests that that take care of the worship of these two idols, these false gods. So Ahab sent messengers to all the Israelites and had the prophets assemble at Mount Carmel. Elijah approached all the people and said, how long are you going to be paralyzed by indecision? So what is he saying here? What does that mean?
You can't run the fence.
Yeah, you
You
can.
got to do it.
That's what he's saying. He says, in your heart, you can't make up your mind who you serve. You're trying to serve God. You're trying to serve. He says you're in the valley of indecision. There's no hope for you. A person that's lukewarm in that. How long are you going to be paralyzed? Such a strong word there that he uses to describe that. They're paralyzed by their fear. What are we going to trust now? If the Lord is the true God, then follow Him. But if Baal is, follow him. So stop being wishy-washy. Do one or the other. But the people did not say a word. Elijah said to them, I am the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but there are 450 prophets of Baal. Let them bring us 2 bulls. Let them choose one of the bulls for themselves, cut it up into pieces, and place it on the wood. But they must not set fire on it. I will do the same to the other bull and place it on the wood. But I will not set it on fire. Then you will invoke the name of your God, and I will invoke the name of the Lord. The God who responds with fire will demonstrate that he is the true God. All the people responded, this will be a fair test. Now, imagine your worship's gotten down to the point to where you've got to really put your God to the test to figure out if he's God. I mean, that's almost oxymoronic, right? He's my God, but I kind of got a test. He's got to pass a test first to make sure that he's God. And that's what Elijah's laying out here. He's saying that what you're doing makes no sense. And I'm about to prove it. Elijah told the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls for yourselves and go first, for you are the majority. Invoke the name of your God, but do not light a fire. So they took a bull, as he had suggested, and prepared it. They invoked the name of Baal from morning till noon, saying, Baal, answer us. But there was no sound and no answer. They jumped around on the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah mocked them. Yell louder. After all, he is a god. He may be in deep thought, or perhaps he stepped out for a moment, or has taken a trip. I love this. Perhaps he is sleeping and needs to be awakened. So what has he done? He said, maybe your God's like a man. You sure you're not worshiping a man that has all these limitations and needs? Maybe that's your mistake. So they yelled louder, and in accordance with their prescribed ritual, mutilated themselves with swords and spears until their bodies were covered with blood. Throughout the afternoon, they were in ecstatic frenzy, but there was no sound, no answer, no response. So what they did, they went to cutting. Okay. Elijah then told all the people, approach me. So all the people approached him. So they're crowded up close. He said he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. This is on Mount Carmel. Then Elijah took 12 stones, corresponding to the number of tribes that descended from Jacob, to whom the Lord's message had come. Israel will be your name. With the stones, he constructed an altar for the Lord. So he took 12 stones out of that old broken down altar that was on Mount Carmel, and he built this new altar. And around the altar he made a trench large enough to contain 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut up the bull, and placed it on the wood. Then he said, fill 4 water jars and pour the water on the offering and the wood. So 4 water jars would be about 35 gallons each. So a lot of water. When they had done so, he said, do it again. So they did it again. Then he said, do it a third time. So they did it a third time. The water flowed down all sides of the altar and filled the trench. Everything is totally saturated. When it was time for the evening offering, Elijah the prophet approached the altar and prayed, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, prove today that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and have done these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are the true God, and that you are winning back their allegiance. So there is a purpose in this, that we now has finally been spoken. God's not doing this to only defeat Baal, although he's in this showdown with Baal. What God's heart is in this is to have his people back. He just wants his people back. That's simple.
It's crazy. They're in the middle of a famine drought, and they're pouring out all this water, and they're not even questioning it. They're just like, okay.
No, go get water. They got water. And the other side of that is, for 3 years they've been in a drought, and they still haven't thought to cry out to the Lord. That's how perverse the whole nation had become. And it takes one man that's near to the heart of God to show up and change that. I mean, that's all it takes is one man that's near to the heart of God that will act on his behalf. And that's a lesson for all of us, because we live in a time, if there's ever been a spiritual drought, we're in one. And the same power that did this, the same power that rolled the stone away, as the song says, it's our power too, alive in us today. That's enough passion. 2017 or whatever it was. All right. Then fire from the Lord fell from the sky. It consumed the offering, the wood, the stones, and the dirt. All this, they threw themselves down with their faces to the ground and said, "The Lord is the true God. The Lord is the true God." Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let even one of them escape." So they seized them, and Elijah led them down to the Kishon Valley and executed them there. Remember the Kishon Valley? This is where Asa took all the Asherah poles and he smashed them and he burned them there. Now those who practice that with the people. Then Elijah told Ahab, "Go on up and eat and drink, for the sound of a heavy rainstorm can be heard." So Ahab went up to eat and drink, while Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel. He bent down toward the ground and put his face between his knees. He told his servant, "Go on up and look into the direction of the sea." So he went on up, looked, and reported, "There is nothing." 7 times Elijah sent him to look. The 7th time the servant said, "Look, a small cloud the size of a palm of a man's hand is rising up from the sea." Elijah then said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up the chariots and go down, so that the rain won't overtake you." Meanwhile, the sky was covered with dark clouds. The wind blew. There was a heavy rainstorm. Ahab rode toward Jezreel. Now the Lord energized Elijah with power. He tucked his robe into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Okay. So you got to get this picture in your head, man. These horses are running about 35 miles an hour. And here comes old Elijah with his skirt up in his belt. And he's just running right by him. Okay. But the 7th time. So what's significant about the number 7? On the 7th day, God, he quit what he was doing. And then we're told later, as the children are in the wilderness and they'll be given the law, that on the 7th day, they're to quit. They're to remember the 7th day and to keep it holy, meaning they're to do the same thing God did on that day, and that's not to do anything. And then as we move through that period, we discover that it becomes not only a day to quit, but it becomes to signify refreshment, renewal. So that year of Jubilee, and every year, every 7th year, you forgave the debt, and the land rested in the year of Jubilee, and in the 77th year, you had them back to back. So there was 2 years there that this would happen. And so every time we see the number 7, and we see anything that's happening on the 7th day, we can either know that we're honoring something that God is or God did, or that we are celebrating a renewal or a time of refreshment. And so in this 7th trip up the mountain, what does it signify?
Day of relief.
Day of relief, day of renewal, day of restoration. The rain is coming after 3 years. So the writers, the Hebrew writers, because of the creation story, always want to remind us that when we see that number 7, that we are participating with God in a very unique way, because up until that, up through the day 1 through 6, God has worked. He rested on the 7th day. Then he gave man work to do, but they're to rest on the 7th day. And now it's even come to mean that we rest and God refreshes. And that's what he's doing here. So we'll stop there. We'll get in chapter 19 where he all of a sudden gets scared. Must have been low oxygen in the brain after doing all that running.